The Barbarian War, Chapters 4, 5, and 6. The Breaking of Silence. Chapter 4. Marshal Antima started to rise as Prime Minister Singh entered the chamber, but she waved him back down as she took her seat. Her jaw was clenched in a hard line as she looked around the room, at both her fellow ministers and the military contingent. She took a moment to steel her resolve before giving the marshal a nod. "All right, tell me. What happened at Persephone?" she said in measured tones, though her outwardly calm demeanor fooled no one. Kwasi took a deep breath and met her gaze. Prime Minister, at approximately 1750 hours local time, Persephone was struck by what appears to have been a relativistic kinetic kill vehicle. We're still in the process of gathering data, and we have only a single image of the vehicle itself, taken a split second before impact. But I can tell you this much: the device was most definitely artificial, and that this was no accident. "I'm sorry, a relativistic kinetic kill vehicle?" The new Soratar minister Thrasath interjected, before Leandra could respond. "What exactly is that?" "In layman's terms, it is a spacecraft that has been accelerated near the speed of light," Antuma replied, though in this case the vehicle in question seems to have been little more than a propulsion system and reactor, with just enough computer control to guide it to its target. "We have examined the evidence closely and the numbers are staggering. Given our best estimates, the energy discharge was in the neighborhood of 30,000 gigatons of explosive force." The silence following that pronouncement was deafening. The other ministers stared at him in shock, struggling to make sense of it. "Survivors?" Leandra asked softly. None," he replied. "Perhaps some microbes on the far side from the impact, which means over 100 million people were wiped out of existence." Kwasi's professional mask was firmly in place, leaving him wooden and stiff. To the uninitiated it might seem as if he didn't care about those deaths, but in fact the opposite was true. It was only by clinging to his professionalism he was able to cope at all. There were a number of ships in the system, which is where we've drawn most of our data from, but all ships in orbit at the time of the blast were completely destroyed. "Dear God," she whispered, "do we have any idea who might have done this?" "I think that's obvious, Prime Minister," Admiral Fujimoto said grimly. "It has to be the Konhim, unless someone here has any other suggestions." She glared at them, daring them to disagree. "But why now?" the Ronin Minister Omega, 445 Intersect Gamma asked aloud. "And why a human world?" "I do not disagree with you, Admiral, for I cannot imagine another party being involved. But the Konhim showed no interest in attacking human worlds during the previous war." "Because we intervened," she shot back. "If we hadn't stepped in when we did, the Konhim horde would have destroyed the Triumvirate. If they've decided to try again, it only makes sense to eliminate the biggest threat first." But Persephone was not a military target, the Ophiptera Minister Bizagab said in confusion. There was no fleet based there, no critical industry, no obvious reason for it to be attacked. "I believe there was, Minster," Nasat said evenly, "and Admiral Fujimoto has put her finger on the reason." His inclusion in this meeting was almost an afterthought, but given his ascending star, he was a welcome addition. Persephone was almost certainly attacked solely because it was a human world. Whether it was what we would consider a military target was most likely immaterial in the eyes of the Konhim. Even now, I believe they consider humanity to be as dangerous as they view themselves, whereas the other races of the Tetrarchy are still considered to be little more than cannon fodder, Helene finished, before giving Nasat an apologetic look. "No offense." "None taken," he agreed easily. "Fine. We're all in agreement it must be the Konhim who attacked Persephone, absent any conflicting data," Leandra interjected, as she steered the discussion back to its roots. "The more important questions are these. Is there any way of knowing when and where they'll strike again? And can we stop another attack once it has been launched?" The Marshal and the Admiral shared an uncomfortable look before Kwasi finally answered. "No, Prime Minister, there is not. Not easily, at any rate." "Do you mean to tell me there is nothing we can do?" she growled in return. "That the Konhim can simple fire one missile after another at us until Earth itself is destroyed? Because that answer is unacceptable. If, and I stress if, we manage to locate the launch vehicle before an attack, then we have an excellent chance of preventing it from taking its place. Short of that? Antema shook his head sadly. We could try deflecting it somehow, but considering how large an area we would have to cover, and the very brief window we would have in which to work with, ma'am, preventing another attack will require a great deal of luck. What about planetary shields? Leandra asked desperately. We never placed them around our own worlds, after seeing how easily the Konhim defeated them. But is it possible they would shield us? No, Prime Minister, Kwasi said reluctantly. It would take months to build and emplace the generators needed for the shields, months that we likely do not have. And as you said, the Konhim already know how to defeat them. We can and will do everything in our power to hunt down the ship or ships responsible for this attack. But at the moment, we are at a loss as to how. He took a deep breath and said softly, I am sorry, ma'am. For a moment, it looked as if the Prime Minister was launched into a tirade of truly epic proportions. But instead, she rose to her feet and turned away, looking at something only she could see. The seconds stretched out into minutes, until she finally began to speak. If we are unable to prevent another attack, then at the very least we can ensure the Konhim live to regret their decision, she said coldly. Leandra turned and faced the others, her eyes as hard as stone. Assemble your forces, Marshal. You are hereby authorized to do whatever it takes to wreck their ability to make war. The look on his face was unreadable. Meaning? Meaning I want them broken, Field Marshal. You will send a punitive fleet to the Konhim worlds and shatter them. You will use any and all means at your disposal to see that they never, ever threaten anyone ever again. She leaned forward, her eyes boring into his. Do I make myself clear? Yes, Prime Minister, he said softly, crystal clear. The next day, a small shuttle entered the orbit of a remote Tetrarchy world. The planet itself was wholly unremarkable, save that it was one of the few examples where its moon was capable of supporting life. Even so, the satellite was sparsely populated, due to its poor soil and unpredictable weather. The shuttle landed near the foothills of the moon's largest mountain ranges, far from the beaten path. A small cottage lay nestled in the shadow of a snowy peak, requiring the lone sortor who had emerged from the craft to journey by foot up a narrow and treacherous path. He took his time navigating the rocky track before finally arriving at the door of the humble dwelling. He hesitated for a moment, as if even after the long journey he had reached his destination, only to consider turning back at the last second. Making his decision at last, he reached out to knock on the thick wooden door, only to have it swing open before making contact. The resident of the cottage stepped out to greet his visitor, saying nothing as he regarded the sortor who shifted his weight uncomfortably from one foot to another. Hello, Nasat, Giaj Guyaz said resignedly. I was wondering when our paths would cross again. Greetings, Diaksh, he began awkwardly, only to be waved off. I am no longer Diaksh, the Konhim sighed. That part of my life is behind me. He folded his arms as he took in the sortor's uncomfortable stance and chagrined expression. I take it this is not a social call, he continued, as a wintry smile appeared on his face. No, Nasat replied. You once asked for my help to help negotiate an end to the war. Yes, I did, Giaj acknowledged, and for that I am in your debt. I know, he said sadly. I have come to collect. Chapter 5. The human colony of Thule was far from a garden paradise. Its many glaciers and fjords were quite spectacular, to be sure, but except for a narrow band at the equator, the bulk of the planet was a frozen wasteland. Blizzard conditions were the norm on much of the surface, and outside of the hardiest of adventurers, it was far from a popular destination. What made it valuable, however, was its location. Its many moons were rich in minerals, from titanium and phosphorus to fissionables such as uranium and plutonium. It had become one of the major fabricating facilities of the Tetrarchy, and much of the new fleet had been constructed in one of Thule's many shipyards. Most of the colony's residents resided in orbital structures, allowing them to live near where they worked. Needless to say, such an important location was heavily guarded and monitored, and when the alarms began to sound, the population headed immediately to the shelters, while the naval garrison sought to train their guns on the attacker. Only the RKKV traveled at relativistic speeds, and 37.2 seconds was not enough time to react between first sighting and impact. Marshal Antuma was ashen as he relayed the news. Helene Fujimoto could only stare in shock, her head in her hands as Kwasi slumped into his chair. Nasat looked at the humans, first one, then the other, before gently clearing his throat, as he had so often seen them do under similar circumstances. "Marshal, what are your orders?" he asked softly. Kwasi slowly turned to him, as if even that simple movement took every gram of strength he had. "The Prime Minister's directive was quite clear, Colonel," he replied. "The attack on the Konheim homeworlds goes as planned, with one slight alteration." "And what would that be?" Helene asked finally, still stunned by the tragedy. "That I will not be taking charge of the fleet," he said gravely. "You will." The Admiral started to protest but was cut off with a wave of his hand. "Don't tell me you're not up to the challenge because I know better," he informed her. "No one knows how to employ those ships better than you do." "Other than you," Fujimoto said sharply. "And just what will you be doing in our absence?" "Trying to find a way to stop these attacks," he said quietly. "What good does it do to pound the Konheim into paste if there's nothing left to come back to?" "Marshal," Nasat said carefully, "you said there was no way to stop them, not without a great deal of luck." "Then let us hope I am lucky," Kwasi said with a half-smile. "In the meantime, Admiral Fujimoto will be relying on you even more than before." "Of course, sir," Nasat said quietly. "I will not let you or her down." "I know you won't," said after a moment, as an odd expression played across his face. "Once again I must ask the impossible from you, Nasat. I would apologize for that, except—" He shrugged helplessly, unable to finish. "I understand," the Sortor nodded. "After all, humanity came to our aid when it was most needed. It is only fitting that we return the favor." "I hope you still feel that way in a moment," Helene informed him with a trace of levity, "because I must tell you that I have no need for a colonel." Nasat blinked in surprise. "I do not understand. If you do not require my services, I will of course stand down, but—" He froze, the words dying in his throat. "Dear Creator, not again." "I'm afraid so, General," she said with a smirk. "Morale will be especially important now, and with you commanding one of the divisions, it could make all the difference." 10 years ago, I'd never touched a weapon, he protested. "I am not qualified to lead a company, let alone a division. By human standards. As you have pointed out so many times before, you aren't human," Antuma said brusquely, interrupting him. "You have risen to the challenge time and again, and I have no doubt you will do so now." Nasat started to speak, but the Marshal shook his head. "The debate is closed, General." "Yes, sir," he said at last. "I'll give you the attack transport, Gabriel," Helene informed him, "though the actual piloting will be handled by Navy personnel, of course. She's a good ship with a good crew." "I'm sure she is," Nasat said with some trepidation. He paused for a moment, struck by a sudden thought. "I do have one request, Admiral." "I suspect I already know what it is," she nodded. "Raykrit is slated to command the medical detachment on the Clara Barton, if memory serves. I'll see to it that your ship and hers are assigned to the same task force." "Thank you, Admiral," he said quietly. "You're welcome," she replied. "As it happens, I have a request for you." "Of course," Nasat answered. Her face softened. "Go home, Nasat. Spend time with your family. Hug your children." She suddenly found it hard to meet his gaze, "because we are scheduled to depart in 36 hours. "But why do you have to leave?" Tychist asked, as he clutched his mother's hand. "Please don't go!" Chechla sobbed as she buried her head in her father's chest. Nasat and Raykret both struggled to fight back their own tears as they sat their children down. "We don't want to go," Nasat said softly, holding his family close. "But there is something important we must do." "It's the Konheim, isn't it?" their son said with sudden vehemence. "I heard people talking. They want to kill us." Their daughter lifted her head, her eyes wide. "Is that true?" she whispered. "I had hoped we would never need have this conversation," Raykret said to her husband, as heartache stained her every word. "Nor I," Nasat replied, as she laid her head on his shoulder. With a heavy sigh, he looked at his children. "The Konheim have attacked the human worlds," he told them, "so we must go and stop them. But I promise you, we will be back before you know we are gone." He forced a smile on his face, but his children saw right through it. "But what if something happens?" Chechla wailed. Rykret took a deep breath and lifted her children's heads. "Now listen to me," she said in firm tones. "We will have none of that. Your father and I have both fought the Konhim before, and nothing happened." The two of them shared a brief glance, as they pointedly ignored the lie. "Your mother is right," Nasat said smoothly. "So I need the both of you to be very brave." The twins looked at him, still unmollified. "Aunt Pellet will look after you, but she'll need you to keep her from being frightened. Can you do that for me? Please?" The twins looked at one another, and then solemnly nodded their heads. "We promise," they vowed. Emotion threatened to strangle the words in his throat. "I'm so proud of you," he said hoarsely, as Rykret bit down on her lip to fight back the tears. Chapter 6. During the last war, Marshal Antuma had found himself in the unenviable position of sending others off to fight, and all too often die, while he himself stayed behind in relative safety. Relative being the operative word, since the Konhim had intended to attack every triumvirate world eventually, but thankfully the war ended before they were able to complete that goal. Not being able to share in the danger with those under his command had been the hardest thing he'd ever done. Much harder than suddenly discovering the war he'd be fighting would be for real. Part of him longed to be part of the mission to the Konhim homeworlds, but what he'd told Helene had been absolutely correct. If there were no human worlds to come back to when they finished their job, then all they would have achieved was mutual destruction. A less than ideal outcome, to say the least. The problem was that there were 11 human worlds, 9 now, that were potential targets. At best, he could cover 2 with the forces he had, and that was stretching his units to the absolute limit. Not to mention the fact they still hadn't come up with a way to actually find the attackers, preferably before they launched another RKKV. One location was a no-brainer, Sol. With both Earth and Mars as potential targets, not to mention being the homeworld and the most populated planets by far, that system had to be covered, a mission that he had taken on himself. The other colony, however, which did he choose? Endymion? Zion? Paraiso? Where would the Konhim strike next? And what would happen if he chose wrong? According to our intel, the journey to the nearest Konhim homeworld will take approximately 2 months, Admiral Fujimoto informed her commanders. During that time, I expect each officer and NCO to train their people to a razor's edge. Many of you have fought them before, and you know they will throw everything they have at us to defend their homes, just as we would. I can assure you, they will not just roll over without a fight. The officers nodded in agreement. Most were not actually present. Instead, they were represented by a holographic projection. It was an upgrade that she heartily approved of. Having her commanders flying around in a shuttle for a staff meeting struck her as patently absurd. She touched a key on her console, bring up an image on her display. This is our first objective, Zach. Our best information describes this planet as being sparsely populated. Almost an outpost, in fact. I was seriously tempted to bypass it completely for one of the other targets, but I believe it will give us the chance to learn what new tactics and weapons the Konhim have in store for us, at relatively little cost. That's my hope, at least. The Admiral looked around the room, gauging their response. So far it was encouraging, but many of them had yet to face the Konhim in battle. She knew she could count on the veterans, but the ones who were still unblooded were an unknown quantity. It was perhaps an even bigger reason for her choice of Zach as their first objective, to give the rookies a chance to test themselves at relatively little cost. The confidence and experience they gained from this first battle would pay dividends when it came to the next objective. We are still in the process of gathering information, she continued, and as we learn more, we will pass that on. Study what you have, and we will reconvene at 0800 tomorrow for a more in-depth analysis. Dismissed. One by one, the officers either left the briefing room or disconnected their holographic avatars, until only the image of Nasat remained. "Where are we on the intel side of things?" she asked, coming straight to the point. "I am making progress, but I am afraid that Giage is growing increasingly uncomfortable in his role," Nasat reported. Unsurprisingly, he still feels a sense of loyalty towards his people, despite his disagreement with their current tactics. "I see," Helene said carefully. Is this going to become a problem? I am unsure, the Sortor admitted. He is growing increasingly reluctant, but so far has not yet refused to answer questions. That, however, could change. Then you need to explain to him the consequences, the Admiral said coldly. His people broke the ceasefire and are systematically destroying the human worlds. We absolutely will not tolerate either prevarication or reticence on his part. Make him understand that. Admiral, Nasat began, suddenly uncomfortable. Giage willingly accompanied me because he believes he still owes me a debt of honor. However, he is also a patriot, despite his self-imposed exile. It is my opinion that sooner or later he will come to a line he will refuse to cross. When that happens, the kid gloves come off, Helene growled. I don't think you fully appreciate what the Konhim have done, Nasat. Not the weapon they used on us, but how it has affected humanity. Her dark eyes flashed dangerously. He will tell us what we want to know, one way or another. Is that understood? Yes, ma'am, he said quietly. Good, she said curtly. And to that end, I believe the time has come for some introductions, don't you? Nasat closed his eyes. I will see to it, Admiral. Excellent, she smiled thinly. Giage is a warrior, not to mention smart. He'll figure it out, assuming he hasn't already. I'll expect your report after tomorrow's briefing. Dismissed. Yes, ma'am, he repeated softly, as his image disappeared from sight. Nasat's shoulders slumped as he turned away from the imager. I warned you this was coming, sir, Sergeant Major Lin said gently. I had hoped you were wrong, he said, defeated. Lin nodded in understanding. Do you recall the first time we met? Despite himself, Nasat barked out a laugh. I'm not likely to forget it. I was absolutely terrified of you. That was the idea, Lin chuckled. But I was actually thinking about something you told me about that day. How you thought I was sizing you and the other trainees up for their nutritional value. He cocked his head, regarding him. I wasn't, of course, but that primal fear you felt, coming face to face with a predator in all his martial glory, hold on to that memory, because that is exactly what the Konhim have unleashed. I understand, the Sortor began, only for the human to cut him off. No, you don't, Lin said darkly. Your people were right about one thing. Inside each human lies a monster. We try to keep it chained up, and mostly we succeed. But when something like this happens, somehow Nasat managed to repress a shudder. Then it is up to us to try and keep that monster at bay, he said quietly. Send in Giage, Sergeant Major, he directed, reverting back to formality, and then invite our guests to join us. Yes, sir, Lin nodded as he exited the room. Moments later, the door opened once more, as the former Dayaksh entered, regarding Nasat curiously as he took a seat across from him. So, more questions? He asked evenly. Later, Nasat replied. I have just finished speaking with Admiral Fujimoto, and she is most emphatic about your cooperation. I am afraid she has given me, and you, little choice in the matter. It was suddenly difficult to meet his gaze. I am sorry, Giage, he said with regret. The Konhim's nostrils flared for a moment before he nodded. I have always known this day would come, he said at last. I could, of course, refuse to cooperate, or ensure I am unable to be questioned. The last was uttered calmly, despite the implication. You could try, yes, Nasat agreed sadly, but it is unlikely you will be allowed either choice. Perhaps you underestimate me, Giage replied, as a mocking smile played across his face. No, I do not. Nasat took a deep breath. I am afraid there is more. The Admiral also wishes for you to take a more active role. Specifically, there are certain missions where she feels your participation would be indispensable. I see. The smile disappeared. And just how is she planning on enforcing that? A chime sounded at the door, before Nasat could respond. She has thought of that as well, he said reluctantly, as the door slid open, revealing a small group of humans. Well, hello there, Whisper smirked.